So far, you are doing an amazing progress and we have already learned a lot of Cypress basics. Now, let's focus on interaction with websites and applications. In this lesson, we will create a brand new test and we will automate a form submission using inputs, checkboxes, and buttons. So for that, we will use a practice automation website, which is free to use for automation training. And I can only recommend this to you for practicing of many different automation challenges. So let's go to our browser and you can see it's practice-automation.com. And here I would like to select form fields. And now we have this very nice form which we can film and submit. And after that, we can assert that the form has been submitted and the values are correct. So before we start, let's go to our test runner and we can click here on the specs. And here we can create a new test. So let's click on new spec. Here, click create new spec. And now we will give it a name. In our case, it will be forms.ci.js and click create spec. Now we don't need to run it, so we can click here on the cross. And as you can see, we have a second test here. Also, if we now go to editor, you can see there is also a second form test here. Again, with this simple boilerplate. So let's start with changing the describe description. And I'm gonna change it to something like forms, buttons, and checkbox. Again, the actual name here does not really matter in the context of our course and training. In your real life examples, you will probably follow some of your company patterns and give it a description based off your tickets. Maybe it can be test numbers and the typical patterns of naming. This can vary from company to company and everyone is using it differently. So for this purpose of our training, I will stick to simple descriptions based on what we are doing inside our test. Here, I would like to change the test itself and I'm gonna give it a description of submit and assert form. So before we start, let's go back to our demo CI and let's copy and paste our references to double check that our automated code formatting and everything is working in all of our spec files. Now let's go back to our browser and let's take this URL. In this case, it's practice automation/form fields. Now let's put it here. And in this test, we will be working only with one simple scenario. So we don't need to create before and after each because we will be working inside one it. So it's perfectly fine to put the visit inside the test at the top. Now if we save it, let's go back to our test runner and now click and execute the forms test. And now, as you can see, everything is still passing. And as you can see, now we are also getting some XHR requests, which are being logged with your test runner. Don't worry, you don't need to worry about anything right now. We are now focusing only on the UI automation, but Cypress is putting those logs inside our test runner, which is always good to have. So let's go back. And now let's start with actually creating some steps. So first steps of our test will be load the form, which we have already started. Next step would be something like fill the form. And finally, we would like to assert form details. So right now I have put together a rough plan, an idea on how this test will be structured, so we can start with each of these steps. So after the visit, we can typically do some assertion that we are successfully on the website. Again, it can be asserting, title, it can be asserting URL, or you can select some elements on the page. So let's see. Now, if I inspect the element, we can dive deep and let's find out what we can actually use. And we have some containers, we have some IDs, and you can see there is the ID of main. If we click on that, we can actually find some selectors inside. We have ID of columns. Again, you can use some of these things, but I can recommend you to dig deeper to find something more useful. And we have article, entry points, and now I have found some interesting element. As you can see, it's data test contact form. And from all of these selectors, I think this one suits the best to our automation purposes. It also contains a data test attribute, which is specifically designed only for automated tests, and also the developers know even if they change some classes, etc., they will not touch this attribute because they know it can break some end-to-end tests. So I'm gonna take it. It's the data test of contact form. Go back to our editor, and here we can start with site.get. Now I'm gonna place data test equal to our form, and I think you should already know which assertion we can use. It's should and then be visible. So right now we are asserting then after we visit this web page, this contact form should be visible. So let's save it and go back to Cypress. And as you can see, our test is passing. We are getting this data ID, we are asserting the visibility, and everything is correct. So now we can move on to filling our form. So go back to the browser. And first, what we can fill is this name input. So let's target and inspect it. And you can see we have this input, which is type text. It has some unique name, ID, some class, but there is no data test. In this case, you have two options. You can either add the data test to your code. Typically in the bigger companies, only developers have rights to do it. So you will need to communicate and ask developers to do it. But in this case, we are okay with just using this ID. So let's take it. And now I would like to again call site.get. As you can see, the same pattern. Now I'm gonna put ID, and this is the sign of using ID. So the Cypress know this value is ID because we are using this sign. And the function is type. Again, it's very English-like, so it's not that hard. Here we can do some name, or let me, for example, write Peter. And that's it. I think you can see the pattern. You always need to get some element and then perform some action. It doesn't matter if it's assertion or action type of the command. In this case, we are getting this input and we want to type some value inside it. Now we need to do the same for the rest of the form. In this case, we can just click on any of these checkboxes. Let's say I want to checkbox of pattern, so I can inspect it. And as you can see, we have again some of the values, but here I would like to show you some another way on how you can target element. So let's just grab the name of water. Let's go back. And there is a second way that you don't need only use site.get. You can use site.contains and provide it with a text value. In this case, it's water. Now I simply want to call click. And what it does is very similar to site.get, but this will grab the selector by its text. And don't worry, you can also combine the get and contains to make even more specific selectors. and I'm gonna show you this later. Right now, let's fill the rest. Now we can click here and let's inspect. And again, we can use the text. And as you can see, working with radio buttons and checkboxes in Cypress is very simple. You just need to get it and click on it. You don't need to perform some actions like checkbox, check this, etc. In Cypress, everything is very easy and it's working very reliable. So let's go back to text editor and let's do the same. Sci.contains red dot click. Let's go back. Now we can fill the email. So let's inspect it. And again, in this case, the best idea for us is to use ID of email. So let's copy it. And this will be very similar to name. So sci.get. We are using ID. So let's do the sign for ID. Paste the value. .type. And let's provide it with some random value. In this case, it can be something like peter@test.com. Just make sure you provide it with a valid email form, otherwise it will not bypass the email validation check in that form. And finally, we can go and fill some message. So let's inspect. And again, we can use the ID. This will be the safest way to do it. So right now, sci.get, provided with ID and type. And again, we will provide it with some string. For example, I like Cypress. So right now our form is filled, but we can do one more step, and that is actually clicking on the submit button. So let's go back and you can see we have this button submit. So let's inspect. And again, there is no ID, but what we can use contains and its value. So let's go back and sci.contains, the value is submit. And remember, it's case sensitive, so it needs to be written correctly. .click. And that's it. Now, if we run the test, it should load the form, fill the form and submit it. So let's save and let's make sure we haven't done any mistake. So let's go and execute the test. And as you can see, our test is running and our test passed. As you can see, our form has been submitted. We can see that your message has been sent. We have some values here. And on the left, as you can see, our test execution log is much bigger. As you can see, it's done all the steps and it also highlights you whenever you do it and where have you been during the time of the test. And as you can see, we have, we get something, we type something, we get something which contains submit, we click on it. Again, these logs are very nice because you have an idea of what is being done during the test execution. And so far so good, everything is running, our form has been submitted, but we are missing the final step of the test, and that is assertion. But I'm gonna split it into the two videos because I don't like making too large videos. I know that it's much better for the students to focus on more shorter videos and not the long ones. So I'm gonna cut it here and come back to write assertions in the next video.